Hello everyone and welcome back. Today in the workshop we have the trip to the nursery trident maple. A lot of you, if you've seen my past videos, have seen this tree. It started out as a ball and burlap tree at a nursery that was a good 10 feet tall, if I had to guess. We got it in to the growing container. We let a leader grow, which this leader is actually bent over on the ceiling up here. This tree, I needed to do what I need to do to it now before that leader gets too much taller, because what I'm going to have to do as far as carving work and doing the transition for the taper and everything on the apex of this tree, if I waited till next season and this apex got much larger, I wouldn't be able to do it because I'd end up having to cut the apex off, and I want to allow this apex just to take off and get 10-15 feet tall. The thicker it gets, the better realistic taper and transition we'll have from the trunk to the apex, and then we'll be able to cut it back again and work on it a little bit further. This tree has been doing quite well. I wired this branch into place and this branch into place. I was hoping for some more back budding in the rear, which I did receive, just not exactly where I wanted it to be, so we'll have to work with what we have. Just to show, I have a lower branch here that came out, and it just extended about 1/4 of an inch. It came out really late in the season, and that's about all I got out of it. I've got a dormant bud site here, and I've got a dormant bud site here. As you can see, I do have a back branch here, and this branch up here that popped, neither of which I'm going to be able to use for the final design on the tree. What I'm thinking about currently is, when I do my carve, I'm actually going to probably come down to this dormant bud site here. So from here to the apex is all going to have to be cut off and removed. And I'll show you at the side here. We're going to take it from here all the way down to this dormant bud site. So when you get to that part of the tree, it'll start doing the taper, and then we'll get it to where it is currently. I'm going to leave a little wide at the top as well, anticipating this getting larger and wider as it grows as well. So eventually we'll get a realistic taper out of this tree. I do have healing over, I would say, 80% of this top. There's one little spot right here that didn't have any callousing. So all of this up here is still alive, which is a good thing. Sometimes they'll die back, sometimes they don't. This one in particular did not. One thing I'm thinking about doing this go around as we style it today, two things actually. I'm going to probably do a thread graft on this tree on one of these sides, possibly. But what I really would like to do is a thread graft to the rear. And like I said before, I'm going to take it back to this dormant bud site here. If I don't get a bud to pop here, I'm concerned about it dying all the way back. I'm hoping that if I do a thread graft about 1 inch or so below that dormant bud site, and I'll have enough time this season for that thread graft to take before I get much dieback below there. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. It's something new. I've never tried to do this before. I've never tried to do a thread graft and a cut back all in one season. But for what the tree cost, I'm willing to take the risk. I know that it probably won't die back much more than that. Like I said, I'm going to go about 1 inch above this bud site to where I'm going to start my carving and my taper creation. So if I do get die back, hopefully it'll just die back to that bud site. But just to ensure that in the event it decides to die back further, I'm going to have a branch down here, hopefully that it will die back to, if it takes some time. So we'll have to see, keep our fingers crossed, see what's going on there. I intentionally, I want to show you this side branch over here. I intentionally left this upper branch here grow, and then I let this lower branch go, because what's going to end up happening is this lower branch here is going to be a sacrificial branch for grafting and will be removed eventually, which will in turn leave this upper branch as the branch that we're going to save. I do have a small whip here as well. I might try to use it for the thread graft. Not 100% sure yet. It's like 30 degrees out today, so this ground is frozen in this pot. So I'm kind of concerned about the condition of some of these branches. You know, when we do the cut back and everything, I've got this branch here to fool around with and test out just to see how much I can bend it before it snaps. And that'll let me know if today's going to be a good enough day to do a thread graft or not. I'm not going to take it to the extreme. If I can't, we're just going to have to take it time, you know, a little bit at a time. I'm sure there's some pliability in these branches. This branch being the main branch, I'm probably not going to do much of anything with it. I'm just going to continue to let it expand because I want it to thicken up. It seems to me like this upper branch has thickened up a little bit more than it has this growing season. And that's why I wanted to use this as the thread graft, because I feel like if this is the one getting more energy, it's going to be able to extend quicker and thicken quicker, which will help that thread graft take faster. So let's go ahead and get started. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to go ahead and get my marking pin so I can trace the projected path of our cut. Very similar to what we did with the black pine. So it's probably frozen as well, but we'll see what we can get. We should be able to do what we need. Now when we're doing this, we need to also look at the side where we are anticipating doing this cutback. And we want to look and see if there's any potential dormant bud sites here that we can incorporate into the design, because the more of these dormant bud sites that we have, the more chance we have of new branches breaking there, which, you know, the more branches we have break around the cut site, the faster the cut's going to heal. So that's something we need to be looking at as well when we're doing this tracery as well as the cutting portion. We want to make sure we can try to get as many as we can. Let's see here, I'm going to start on this side. And you may trace this anywhere from 1 to 5 times. You know, it just whatever looks good is what we go with. I'm going to try to do it a little bit of a zigzag, I guess, in a way. As you can see, what I've done here on that side, it's kind of a, it's not a straight cut, it has a little bit of movement to it. And I think that's going to be a little bit better for this species with a thin bark, not as craggy, kind of like what the pine was. The pine, we just did pretty much a straight cut, which in a way doesn't really matter, because when that thing heals over and eventually gets that nice flaky bark, you're not even going to be able to tell what the cut site looks like. This, being that it has a thinner bark or a smooth bark, it doesn't have a textured bark, you kind of want to put a little bit of detail in it now, so that way when it heals over eventually, it's going to make it look like a branch, and it's going to look like that you put a little bit of movement in it when it was bent. Really, it's a cut, but we want to give the illusion that it was a branch all along and it was bent in that position. So this side here, I'm going to try to keep that bud site there. I think I can get a branch to pop. Take a look at this and see what we've got now. And again, just like the pine, we're going to want to stay above this cut site. What I'm probably going to be doing on this is initially I'm going to do a mechanical cut with a saw and cut it just at a straight 45, just straight off. I'm going to come back after that with a grinder, and I'm going to grind it down to the line. That way I have more finite control over exactly what's going on with the carving portion of it and the cutting portion of it. When you do large material removal for apexes and branch removals and things along those lines, you're going to want to use a mechanical or an electrical carving type tool, more so than you're going to want to use the knob cutters and the branch cutters, because you would be at it for hours and hours and hours trying to get it done with that. So I'm going to show you the grinder that I have. It's not very expensive. The Makitas are the ones that a lot of people like to use. Personally, I can't find a Makita. I would like to be able to. They're very, very pricey. When you do find them, they're in $100 to $150 plus range. I found something that I feel works just as good, and it's about 30 bucks. So for me, that's within my budget. This is a projected cut path. Hopefully you can see that. I'll zoom in on it here real quick so you can actually see it. I'll show you a couple of the bud sites I'm talking about that are dormant currently that hopefully will, after the carving's done, we'll be able to see new branches growing from these areas. So here's the cut path on this part of the tree. Right here is a dormant bud site. It almost looks like there's a bud swelling and forming right here, so I'm going to stay well above that. I'm actually going to be on the other side of this line, which gives me about a 1/4 inch between where the cut's going to be and where that bud site is. And hopefully we'll get a branch to pop to here, and it'll grow out this direction. It'll actually be a integral part of the design eventually, which will help even greater with the callousing back here. Don't have a whole lot on this area down through here, so I don't think I'm going to get much anywhere there. Coming around to the back, we've got a giant area right here where there used to be some branches, and typically when you have an area like this, there are dormant buds in there. They're just so small that you can't really see them, and they're not activated until they're needed. Once we do this cut, the tree's going to tell them, okay, you're needed now, so let's activate. And I'm going to actually be thread grafting just below here. I'll probably be right in maybe where that dot is. If you can see that dot on camera, I don't know if that's below the shot or not. But I'll probably thread graft right here, which will be a good inch or so below where the cut's going to be. That way if it does die back, hopefully if it does die back, it just dies back to here and we get a dormant bud pop and everything. And then we got a nice back branch where we need it and everything. This branch here was a dormant site just like this. And when we cut this, it said, okay, now you're needed because I don't have anything back here. And I did, if you remember, put this side towards the sun this season. And then I've got, you know, this lower branch here, and I got a bunch of them down here, but don't really need them down here. We need them up here. So that's what we got there. On this side, we don't really have anything. There's not really any area that I see over here that could potentially be a dormant bud site. Now that doesn't mean I'm not going to get a back budding area site back here. The other trident maple that I had, I did get some back budding just on smooth bark like this. All of a sudden the tree said, okay, we need to put something here, and a branch started growing out. I'm not anticipating that happening, and I never do. If it does happen, it's just a bonus. So this is where I see us doing the cuts. I'm going to try to salvage this branch, so we're going to have to bend it and move it out of the way while we're doing our cuts. So it's well out of the way of the saw. Like I said before, when we do our sawing cuts, if we're not careful, the saw will cut the top of this branch off, and that's not what we're after. We're after keeping this branch viable to do a potential thread graft with it. So we'll go ahead and get started. Get this branch moved out of the way. I'm going to utilize the same technique as I did before with the wire. When I do wiring, I always pull off the spool more wire than I actually need. So I always have extra wire, and I don't throw this away. I always save it because you can always use this. You know, that's a decent length. 6-8 inches or so is what I have here. I can always use this somewhere. Whether it's doing what I'm doing here with moving this out of the way of the saw, or if it's a situation where it's a smaller branch somewhere that I can wire later. I always save them. Now if it's a small 1-inch piece or something like that, I typically save anything from about 3 inches and up. So again, the saw we're going to use for this is we're just going to use the Silky Gumboy on this one because we're just hogging this material off. We're not worried about intricate cuts. I do want to take this branch off because obviously it's going to be removed anyway. And let's see how much bend we can get from this branch. That looks good. So let's see how much bend we can get from it. Now this, like I said, the soil's frozen. There's not a whole lot of sap in these branches right now. That's almost 180 degree bend. The bark is not compromised at all. So we're going to be able to probably do a thread graft fairly decent on this tree. It's a little stiff right there. We're probably going to be able to do a decent thread graft on this tree today, based on what I see on that right there. Now that doesn't dictate what the entire tree is going to do, but that gives me a sign of where potentially I can, or how far I can potentially take these branches on this tree before I have an issue. Now let's see what I'm going to do here as far as the cut is concerned. I guess I'll go this direction with it. And I'm just going to start up here high, well out of the way of where I'm going to eventually bring this back to. We're just going to cut it off. Okay, I know what some of you are thinking. Wait a minute, he started on doing the top cut, but he didn't do the back cut. I wanted to try the top cut because I knew the center of this wood up here was dead. And it's very, very hard wood once it dies. I did go ahead and do a back cut here, as you can see. The Silky Gun Boy is going to take me probably 15 minutes to get through this with the Silky Gun Boy. So I do have another option. If you don't have this option, you don't have to use it. But they're not expensive. I think I paid $40 for the saw, maybe $5 to $10 for the blade. It's about the same price as you're going to get for purchasing just the Silky Gun Boy itself. I advocate starting with a manual hand saw before moving to a power saw. Of course, you want to make sure you have all the proper safety precautions in place when you use a power saw. But for what we're doing here with this rapid branch removal, or large dead wood portion of the trunk, I am going to use a power saw. I'm not going to get in a debate of what types or what brands are out there and what works the best. I'm going to show you what I chose. Before I was in the profession I'm in now, I was a carpenter. My father's been a carpenter for 40 plus years, and we utilize DeWalt for every power tool that we have, with the exception of a few saws, which some of the saws that we have, miter boxes and circular saws and stuff, are Rockwells, which are a very expensive saw, but you use those when you're a professional. Alright, DeWalt Sawzall. It doesn't have to be a DeWalt, it can be any brand Sawzall, they all work. The blade is the key. There are a couple different kinds of blades. This one is a wood blade that can also cut nail. I find that the teeth last longer when cutting wet wood. There's another one that I have that I might try instead. It's not a DeWalt blade, but I think will probably actually work better, is this one here. It's made by Porter Cable. It's for wood pruning. If you look at it, it almost looks like a bandsaw or a bow saw blade, and that's for extremely rapid wood removal. I think I'm actually going to use this one over this one because I've never used it before. I want to try it out and see how it works. I can stand to make a little bit of a mistake where I'm cutting right now. Now what I did do is I went ahead and did cut a fairly deep groove in here. So this saw blade is going to sit in the side of this tree a good ½ inch or better once it gets started. As you can see, it's almost the entire blade's width that I've already cut a groove in there for this. That will act as a guide so that the blade's not going to be jumping all over the place and I run the risk of cutting the apex off, because that's something that you can run a risk at doing this. So you definitely want to start out. You don't want to start out using power saws right off the bat. I recommend using manual saws, because there's going to be a lot of times where you're not going to be able to use a power saw to do any kind of work on your tree. You know, cutting the top of this off before the apex was here, you could use this power saw with no problem. Roots and cutting root bases off of root balls is what I mainly use this saw for. Okay, I use it for the reason that this blade, $6-8. Silky Gumboy blade, $20-30. I'll take a $6 blade replacement over $20-30 blade replacement all day long. So that's what I mainly use this for. But today, for today's demonstration and doing this large cut, we're going to go ahead and use it for this as well. So here goes nothing, guys. That saves a heap of time from using a manual saw. The rest of this is going to be grinding work. Here's the piece we removed. As you can see, you can see the heartwood in here. There's my back cut. If you look at this, it actually snapped off right above my back cut. That's why it's important to do that back cut, because if I didn't have that, it would have probably snapped off here and it would have ripped that cambrium on down the tree. So again, I can't stress that back cut or bottom cut, whatever you want to call it, initial failure point cut, whatever you want to call it. I can't stress it enough. So there's what we're left with. You can see I am a good 1/2 inch above my cut line here, and I'm probably a good 1 to 1.5 inches above my cut line here. So there's going to be a lot of grinding work that needs to be done to the tree, but I'd rather take it off a little bit at a time than take off too much. This side here, again, got about 1.5 inches all the way around, and I do prefer that. Like I said, that way I can sneak up on it a little bit at a time, and I can get the precise movement and carving that I intend to have. I just want to get the bulk of that initial material off of there, because if I was to try to grind all of that, it would take me forever and a day to do that. So that's what we're left with. Let me get the grinder set up next, and then we'll be back.